if I recall correctly, you got Andrew Klavan no relation to PS5. So on the video game topic, this was aimed both at me and Josh, who got Dad a PS5. So on the video game topic, what are some of your thoughts on video games that you'd like to share? Favorite franchise, soundtrack, characters, storylines, etc. Bonus points for talking about Halo, Elden Ring, or Final Fantasy. Well, we're going to talk more about this on our live stream with the VIPs, but I am going to talk about Final Fantasy here because so my dad and I grew up playing video games together, or I grew up playing video games with my dad, I should say. My dad has always loved games, just overall. My father, no relation, has been a big fan of games from the beginning. He loves word games and puzzles, but he also when video games came along, Space Invaders. He always tells this story about getting Space Invaders wrist, where you had to punch the button so hard that he just got like, I don't know, I guess it's carpal tunnel or something. And we had Super Nintendo growing up, and he was so patient with me, and I would sort of get frustrated because I was little and I couldn't beat it. And then I got to the point where I could beat him all the time. And I can still beat him all the time at video games. But this is sort of beside the point because, now we have this system, this new system. And it's been really fun to introduce for Josh to introduce me and Dad to some of his favorite games. And Final Fantasy has been a big part of that. I wrote some stuff about Final Fantasy on Law and Liberty because I just think it's so beautiful as a game. And I will say that I had never really experienced the open world stuff before. And I had never experienced the turn-based fighting role, the RPG stuff, I guess. I'm kind of a noob when it comes to RPGs. Let's put it that way. And I got really into the history of RPGs as I was learning about Final Fantasy, because it's so cool to me the way you can watch an artistic medium come into being. And my dad and I have talked about this too. It's like, you start with tabletop, right? You start with Dungeons and Dragons. And then you have these kind of RPGs where your characters basically are, meeples from the tabletop game. And gradually you add in characterization and you add in more customizability, but also sort of freer space to move about in, and more elaborate stories. And in Japan, of course, particularly, the character development becomes much more important. And so by the time you get to Final Fantasy, you're really witnessing an art form coming into its own. I mean, and so that's very moving to me, actually, in a funny way. And there are characters you really connect to. There are questions about identity that are being worked out. Who am I, right? And how do I know who I am? So I love that game. It didn't really, I guess we have never been able to get my dad to play the original. But we did, I think, get him the Final Fantasy remake, which I have not played, but Josh has. And this was like, they remastered it and did it with real-time fighting instead of turn-based fighting. And they also kind of expanded out the story in this really fascinating way. So a big fan of that, excited to kind of share that with him. And then this was a great one, a throwback, because my dad and I, particularly when we played together, we would play a lot of the platformers. I love a good platformer, and that's what I'm good at. I'm great at platformers. And so we would Crash Bandicoot, which we found one day in like a bargain bin that we had no idea we were getting into, but of course Crash is like incredible. And there was, Jack and Daxter. There was, of course, every possible Mario game, which I now carry on the proud tradition by playing Mario with my nephew. There's just, all these platformers, you name it, Spyro, you name it, I've been into it. And one of them that we loved was Ratchet and Clank. And Ratchet and Clank has now come into this incredible, like Pixar level PlayStation 5 version. And so playing that was awesome and brought back all these incredible memories. You have this nostalgia sort of associated. We're getting really nerdy here, but I think platformers, it's harder in a platformer to really get a great story going. There are obvious notable exceptions: Braid, Mega Man, Inside, right? There are lots of platformers with great stories, Heart of Darkness, but it can be harder because they can be more formulaic to get something really good and interesting going on. But the graphics alone on Ratchet and Clank are unbelievable. All right, that'll hopefully give you some fodder, and let me know on Locals what you've been playing.